Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master. And before we get into today's episode, smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave us a comment. That helps us out on our end with the YouTube algorithm, but also we love to hear from you guys. We have an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, having said all of that, let's dive in. The prologue to today's story begins on Earth K, which, like we said in previous episodes of the podcast, is actually sort of a nickname because more than one Earth chose that as the name it went by. So, to be really specific, we're talking about our main game world, where King Arthur was the once and future king. And in this episode, we establish that the dimensional coordinates or the frequency that this world vibrates at, and thus its actual numeric designation, is Earth 19,760,327. And while there are divergent timelines and such that still refer to themselves under the kind of umbrella term of Earth K, the characters involved between these worlds have sort of an unspoken understanding that this one is the main Earth K. By the way, some of those other Earth Ks are starting to adopt their own numerical designation, like the home of the variant of Arthur who founded the Bears Lodge. We talked about him a few episodes back. He's a guy named Briggs who hails from Earth 19,750,704, or the Superman Red of Earth 19,850,527. But the main Earth K is the one that we're talking about right now. And there are a lot of things that make that world stand apart from other worlds. One of them, of all things, is Mirror Master's old mirror gun. Many Earths throughout the multiverse have a Mirror Master, and most Mirror Masters have some sort of weird gadget that he uses. And from Earth to Earth, what that gadget does exactly varies quite a bit. On Earth K, the mirror gun does several things. The function that is relevant to today's game, however, is that it has what DC Heroes RPG would refer to as the split power. Or in GURP Supers, they would call it duplication. This is the exact same power that Jamie Madrox has in Marvel Comics, where one man can split into lots of himself, and they're all visually identical, right? The Mirror Master of Earth K referred to his duplicates as his quote unquote reflections, and he'd send them out to rob banks and stuff like that. At least he did back in the Silver Age, back when heroes were far less likely to kill. This matters because each duplicate is basically a clone, right? They are not illusions. They don't shatter like glass if you damage them. They're actually flesh and blood. And they are each a perfect copy of the original. At least that's how they begin. The longer they are around and the more life experiences they have, the more they seem less like the same man and more like brothers. Mirror Master and his mirror gun featured in a lot of adventures over the years. And his archenemy, the Flash, is certainly no stranger to time travel. So it's no surprise that eventually the mirror gun wound up in the wrong era, in the hands of the evil leader of Germany during World War II, in an adventure that we ran that involved both Barry Allen, the Silver Age Flash, and Jay Garrick, the Golden Age Flash. At the end of World War II, it was Arthur who tracked down that evil leader and tried to end his reign of tyranny. There was a struggle. The mirror gun went off, and soon there were lots of copies of both the good guy and the bad guy. The reason we did that is because the German leader shows up in a lot of different comic books doing totally different things. In DC Comics, he becomes Dynaman, while in classic Marvel Comics, he went on to become a villain named Hate Monger. And he has a completely different set of encounters with the likes of Hellboy and the Savage Dragon. And since Earth K was supposed to be where crossovers took place, we wanted all of these things to happen. So, as such, we had to clone the bad guy. The upshot of that story was that we also cloned the good guy, the GMPC. This allowed us to have an Arthur for every occasion. If it was a Green Lantern campaign, we'd have an Arthur with a power ring. If it was a Marvel game, there was a version of Arthur that wore Kree negabands, so on and so forth. So most Earths had one Arthur, but Earth K had tons of Arthurs, right? Which means when the Gestalt being known as Artorias was formed, from all the Arthurs of the multiverse, more of his mind came from Earth K than any other dimension. And it is for that reason that Earth K is now the capital of the Empire. We said a while back that while Jay Mora's world was named Earth J after him, and Earth K just happened to be the next letter in the alphabet, so we used that to talk about where those two worlds had diverged, you know. Years later, we went on to say that the K in Earth K actually stood for king or kingdom, as in King Arthur, right? So it felt right to have Earth K be the place where the main Arthur would have his throne. So, that said, the next thing worth addressing is that there are actually two versions of Artorias. We've talked about that quite a bit recently, so I'm hoping that that doesn't need too much of a recap. The takeaway is that one of those two is very good now, morally speaking, while the other one isn't as evil as it gets, but he's not super good either, right? He's somewhere in between those two extremes. He used to be extremely evil. And when we last saw him, he was conquering Earth 550 million and four. So I think it is pretty understandable that the other Artorias, who is the good one, does not trust his yellow eyed counterpart, right? That made him feel like he had to stay a Gestalt being. In other words, if he would split into his individual selves, it would greatly weaken him. That other Artorias could kill a bunch of weaker Arthurs pretty easily, right? And that's where the mirror gun comes in. The good Artorias gets an idea, which frankly, I'm amazed we had not thought of before now. And that is that the mirror gun is used once again to make even more Arthurs. And that way, the Arthurs that are married are now able to go home to their families. The ones who are single join up with other Arthurs to form the Gestalt being. And here's the thing, every time another Arthur joins up, the attributes of the Gestalt Artorias go up by 1 AP. So he keeps making more and more Arthurs for a while. That way, the good Artorias now has the clear physical advantage over his morally questionable counterpart. And since all the Arthurs who make up this new Artorias are from Earth K, the kind hearted Emperor creates a literal castle in the sky over Earth K that serves as his new palace, while the married Arthurs go home, and several of the unmarried Arthurs take on new roles, such as explorers, or scouts, or diplomats, which brings us to the main plot of this game session, which takes place on Earth 550,000,005, which was inspired by DC's Earth 5 as depicted by Grant Morrison. Our version is the home of a Shazam analog named Captain Virtue, whose real name is Hale Hart, and he lives in this world's version of New York City, which is called Halcyon City. And Halcyon City is actually kind of hard to explain. So to try, I'm going to reference the 1989 Batman movie. Hopefully, we've all seen that film. For any younger listeners who may not have ever seen that, it had a lot of interesting things going on from an artistic point of view. And one of the more striking things that a lot of people have noticed over the years is that the makers of the film wanted to represent both the Batman comics of the Golden Age as well as the Batman comics that were being published when the movie came out. And as such, what year the movie takes place in is somewhat nebulous. As the film starts, we see a family who are dressed as though it were the 1930s or 1940s when the Golden Age comic books were actually made. But they found themselves on the same streets as some punk rockers who were dressed like it was the 1970s or 1980s. So the setting itself is a clever nod to the entire history of Batman, but it also made Tim Burton's Gotham City seem like a strange alternate universe. So too does Halcyon City seem like a strange alternate universe because it is. And like in the 1989 Batman film, it's a mixture of different eras. But whereas the 1989 Batman was dark, this universe is actually bright and colorful. If you think about how oftentimes people remember the past through rose tinted glasses, and specifically, if you think about the sort of world they are actually imagining, that is what Halcyon City actually is. It is the past, but it is a sanitized version of it. Halcyon City is a hodgepodge of everything that people are nostalgic for. And as such, it is a mixture of every past decade. The local 1950s style malt shop might be playing 1980s synthwave music. A lot of whatever it is that you miss can be found here, alive and well. As for the villains, they do exist, but they seem like more of a Saturday morning cartoon character than an actual threat. So when Brad's character, Killfrost, steps through a dimensional portal, arrives on this world for the first time, and looks around, he sees things from the 90s and the early 2000s that were some of his warm childhood memories, right? And he gets kind of excited that some of these things still exist here because on Earth K, those specific things had gone extinct. And with him is a new Arthur variant who also comments on how strange this world is. Arthur grabs a newspaper from a nearby vendor, hoping to learn what year it actually is. But at the top of the newspaper, where it normally gives the year and the date, it's just blank. So either this world just doesn't put the date on their newspaper, or this dimension doesn't even have a calendar system. Either way, the lack of an actual date reinforces this world's timeless quality. And before the two adventurers have much of a chance to do anything else, a kaiju named the Atomic Golem shows up. Brad is happy that it's basically clobbering time, right? So he says the word Savannah and is struck by lightning. He is now wearing a blue and black costume, and he flies towards the giant robot and punches it in the face. Since this particular Arthur just heard the code word, he too says Savannah. And he's also struck by lightning, and now he's also wearing a red and black costume. So he flies over to the robot and starts beating on it too, being very careful, by the way, to not let it stumble into any buildings or do any collateral damage. Arthur actually tries to pick the atom punk robot up off of the ground, but its head is sort of shaped like a bullet and its whole body is smooth and sleek. So it's really hard to get a handhold on this thing. And at that very same time, in the negative multiverse, the Artorias with the glowing yellow eyes, the one who killed Professor Hadron, he has moved on to Earth negative 550 million and five, right? And so, for as nice as Halcyon City is, its Negaverse counterpart is made of the worst parts of every decade. So, the yellow eyed Emperor teams up with the heroic kaiju robot in the evil universe. And together, those two fight that world's villains who are fashioned after the seven deadly sins. So when the villains roll initiative and, begin their role in the game, they yell the word Paganus, which stands for pride, anger, gluttony, avarice, non gratefulness, unchastity, and sloth. And when they do, they're struck by lightning and transformed from juvenile delinquents into older, superpowered versions of themselves. Both of these villains, by the way, wear red costumes with black capes. They attack the Negaverse Artorias and the heroic robot kaiju. And as far as that fight goes, that Artorias wins by a mile, right? And then he actually tries to force that world to be a better place. Because again, he does not have glowing red eyes, right? He's got the yellow eyes, which, for anyone that missed those episodes, that's kind of how we are trying to represent morality in the game. So in this world, he seems heroic by contrast to like how bad everybody around him is. Meanwhile, back in the positive multiverse, in the good version of Halcyon City, a high school dismisses students and tells them to head to this world's version of an atomic bomb shelter, basically. But it was built to withstand the kind of damage that the evil robot kaiju can dish out. So some students head to the shelter like they were told, while others want a front row seat because they have no real sense of fear, even in these extraordinary circumstances. Because in this world, heroes never die and evil never wins. So they just have faith that everything will be all right. And as the other kids do that, Hale Hart and his sister Hannah find a secluded spot and they yell out the word patriot. Since their evil twins had an acronym that represented the seven deadly sins, the hero's acronym stands for the seven opposite virtues: patience, abstinence, temperance, restraint, industriousness, oblation, and tenderness. So once they've transformed into their superpowered forms, the local heroes fly over to where the evil robotic kaiju is. And when they get there, they see Arthur has the same powers as them, and he's wearing a red and black costume, right? So their first thought is that he must be from the Negaverse, which these kids have had dealings with in the past. Hannah Hart asks Brad what his name is, and he says Killfrost. And these kids like think that sounds like a really frightening moniker, right? Captain Virtue says, "No time for chit chat now, sis." Then he helps Arthur lift the robot off the ground and fly it away from the city. Once they get it away from innocent bystanders, the various heroes take turns punching the huge thing until eventually it runs out of hit points and shuts down. The kids ask why the visitors are here, and Arthur says he's an ambassador from the Empire. And when the kids hear the word Empire, they immediately think of evil. So one of them says, "Gee whiz," and then asks if the visitors are sure they aren't villains. Arthur says that while the Empire's history is less than perfect, they mean well now. And since the Empire is made up of 550 million Earths and counting, that gives the Empire a whole lot of advantages. For instance, if a disease is cured on just one of those Earths, they share that cure with all the Earths in the Empire. And most diseases had been cured on at least one of those Earths. So now in the Empire, diseases are practically a thing of the past. He also explains that they have gadgets that can create matter, and they'd be willing to use them to do things like make houses for the homeless, that sort of thing. Captain Virtue says, "But we have to join your empire for you to help us?" And Arthur says, "No, whether you decide to join or not, we really are here to just help you in any way that we can." But the more the visitors learn about this particular world, the more they realize that honestly, this world doesn't need them. This world has already solved most of the problems that the Empire has solved, if not more, right? So here, the Empire seems redundant at best, and it actually seems inferior at worst, which brings us to the epilogue, which takes place in the Negaverse on Earth negative 550,000,005, where, as it turns out, the entire population there is addicted to a strange red blood-like fluid called Perry. So the Negaverse Emperor with the yellow eyes uses his massive levels of omni power to destroy all of this world's Perry. And as a result, the whole planet feels the pangs of withdrawal. And those who try to make more of this strange glowing red fluid are stopped by more of these atomic golems who are basically acting like sentinels. And by the way, for that part, we drew inspiration from the old X-Men six-player arcade game, where some sentinels are like colossal, while others are roughly 6 feet tall. Likewise, the Negaverse Emperor creates atomic golems that are kaiju sized, right? And then he has some that are small enough they can enter buildings and deal with these drug labs in much the same way that Robocop would. But that was it for this one. We ran out of time. There's only so many in the hours in the day, so that this was a 4-hour session for us. But we thought that this one was interesting. We hope that you did too. If so, and if you would like to support our humble little channel, we would love it if you took just a quick moment of your time to smash like, make sure you're subscribed, and leave a comment. And from all of us here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.